Hello, this is Matt from skybow. Are you looking for an easy and fast way to deploy your skybow solutions? I will show you how you can achieve this using the skybow provisioning API.
Today's agenda is, first we have a real quick look about the deployment options that we have within skybow. Then we have a deeper look into the provisioning API, and then I will show you how this will work in a live environment. So, if you use Skybow Solution Studio, you have three options to deploy your solution. The very first and the easiest is a direct deployment, which is just you can choose an existing site on any environment. So different environments, different tenants can be used. The only downside here is you have to have an approval from the global admin the very first time. If you got that approval, the next time it's just site collection admin permissions only. But that is really the easiest approach. So it's a real simple next wizard. But like I said, it's not always possible for security reasons. So however, that you can use that deployment option. For that case, we provide another option, and that's what we call a manual deployment. There we're using an add-in to install the solution. This will not be part of today's webinar. We will paste a link to the documentation, how you can use that one. Here you only need site collection admin permission. So you need to get a site collection, create a pre-created site collection, and you need to have admin permission on that site collection. And then you can use that deployment option. Third is our API deployment, and that's really mostly used to automate the deployment process, or to make bulk deployment, to make multiple deployments, etc. And that's what we are going to have a look together today. So with the API deployment, you can deploy and update your solutions using an HTTP call. So a first-time deployment is possible, but also if you have updates in the later on, as you can see here on the screenshot, you can have different versions deployed to different sites, and then it's you can update each deployment separate. So that's the general thing. You can deploy multiple solutions at the same time to different sites. So that's all configurable in the API. You can say I have one solution should be deployed to, I don't know, 10 sites. Or in the same batch, you can also say solution A deployed to site 1, 2, 3, solution B deployed to site 3, 4, 5, and so on. Then here in Solution Studio, it's completely integrated. Here on the top, you see these three sections. And the third one is the publish section. And here you also see the three deployment types, the site deployment, which is direct one, it's just directly to the site, the API, and the add-in, so the manual one. And under the add-in deployments, you always have an overview of where this solution has been deployed, and also the status of the deployment. Is it still running? Is it completed? Is it did it fail for some reasons? And you would also see a history, what happened when it failed, etc. So you always have an overview of all the deployments. Then we do have an option for a callback URL. So that's also something that can be configured. Callback URL is executed once the deployment is finished. So with this callback, you can, for example, kick off an Power Automate or any other service which can be called by an HTTP request. And yeah, that can be done with the callback URL. And we also have an option, and that's what we will see in the demo afterwards. We have a status field that can be updated if you start from a SharePoint list, for example. So in my scenario that I will show you, we have a list in SharePoint with projects. And every time you add an item to that list, a new project, we will kick off the provisioning of that project. And once finished, we have a status column on that project list, and it's basically reflecting that status here. So in progress, completed, etc. And based on that status, we could, for example, configure skybow triggered actions to do something else once the deployment is finished. So that's what this is used for. I will show you in the demo. And you can also push the updates through Solution Studio. That's would be one approach, how to update a solution. So here you see the different versions. This is still in 1.3, but the latest, the service itself is 1.7. So that will be the latest. And all these sites can be whether manually updated to 1.7. So this one is 1.4. I see, there's a 1.7. I can click on update, and it would automatically deploy 1.7. We could as well just call the HTTP request once again, and if the service configured here is 1.7, it will just install the 1.7 via an HTTP call. So we have both options to push it through Solution Studio or to call the web service once again. Yeah, that's it, basically. There's also a link to the documentation about this one. So everything about the API deployment is documented here. And that's, we will post the link below the video in the description. But for now, I will guide you through it in a demo. So what I've prepared is, like I just described, I have my project side management demo, which is basically a simple list where you can create new projects. So like this, you can say new project, you can give it a title, you can say who will be the leader and who will be the members. In this demo scenario that was from another demo, we can also choose whether it's a site collection or a subsite. That's a technical thing. Normally you wouldn't do that. You will just go for site collection. And here I can put in API webinar demo, maybe 2, just demo. I'm logged in with Sophie. So for this scenario, I will simply take her. And maybe some other members at Edward. I could put in more, but on my environment, I just have these 2 users. All right. Now, once I hit save, there is 2 things are running right now. One is only for this purpose here. We create the site URL, and if I update again, we see the site URL is generated. That's just a calculated column by Skybow in the background. And I'm just creating a URL which is unique. And then, but that's up to you, how you want to have that URL and your logic. And then once this is generated, I create a site collection and I'm starting the provisioning of a project management template. And how this will look like is here. I created a simple construction project template. It's just a site, it's another site. I added some web parts. I have a starter page. I have 2 lists. I have an issue tracker list, the progress list, some templates from SharePoint. I have added this document library. and also some standard folders. So like this, so 0, 0, 0, and just a folder structure. And with skybow, you can also provision or package and publish folders and files, even files within those folders, if you want them to have to be in all the projects, as an example. So I have these like two solutions. I have one solution, which is the project site management demo, where I have the project list. And then I have the construction project template, where this template, like I just showed you, is just a home page having these web parts on it. I have these two lists, so the work progress list, an issue tracker, and the document library. And in the document library, I simply added a couple of folders like this here, so any folder structure. And then in the background, we have packaging options, and there I activated that the content should be packaged as well. That's just the skybow option. And then I created a package. So I created one package. And this package for this solution, I went to publish, and you see I don't have deployments from the other deployment types, but I created an API deployment. And yeah, I was talking too slow, so now it's already finished. So it's already completed. So that was the demo, project 25. Let's check again. Yeah, project 25. And it automatically, now when I click on that link, we come to a new solution, new site. So this was a new site collection. And in this site collection, I automatically deployed that template. As you can see, we have the list, the issue tracker list in here. We have the document library here. So it was all provisioned automatically, even the folders 3 minutes ago. The whole folder structure is here. Everything was automatically provisioned. And at the very end, we sent a Teams message. So, and that was done in the background once the deployment was finished. So when the complete site was successfully deployed, then I wrote a Teams message to the owner. So in my case, it was Sophie. So project webinar demo has been successfully set up and it's accessible here. So I have a link. So this person would get informed about the new solution or the new project. All right, so if we go back to my previous site here. So to my project management demo. That was my last try here. And if we look at the version history, we can see that it was created by me. Then the site URL was generated, and then the provisioning started using this SharePoint app. It sets the status, that's the column here. It's just a choice column. It sets the status always to the current status of the provisioning. So here you see it's in progress, and after 2 minutes, it was completed. And now, based on these changes, I could trigger other triggered actions, execute triggered actions. And that's what I did here on that list. So on that list, so in the project site management, we have, that's the other one, that's this one here. So here I have my project list with where I can enter my projects. And in the background, I've added these two triggered actions. So the first trigger action will create the site, so the project site, and it will start the provisioning. That's what we will see here. It creates the site and it starts the provisioning. And then I will show you right afterwards how this will work. And then in a second trigger action, I informed the people about the provisioning. And that's, again, once updated. And then I'm checking if the status, this provisioning status, which is a choice field, is changed. And if it's completed, then I'm sending a message. So I have two messages. One is sent to the project leader, the email of the project leader. That's a Teams message. That's one of our actions down here. It's the send message. And with this text and the site URL. That URL is just a property on the list. And the second one is about, it's an email to all the members. And here I can simply use this people picker. It's a multi people picker column, and I can use the email addresses. And then it sends a message to those people. So that's the notification once the status is completed. And the first one will simply create a new site collection using the skybow, the SharePoint REST API. It's something you can look up in the internet. So it's nothing from us specifically. It's just the REST call, SP Site Manager create. And I'm passing the name, URL that we just created, all dynamic using skybow expressions. Here I was using a hard-coded language code to be English. The description, if added, the template is a theme site, and the design ID, that's also something you can just Google. It's the default one. And the owner should be this person added to the project leader field. So that will simply create a new site collection. And the second one, that's the provisioning. And if we look at the provisioning, then there are a couple of things to configure. We use our HTTP request action, this one here. And the solution manager is the URL you have to call for the provisioning to start it. It's always the same. So also in the documentation, if we look at the documentation, we go down to endpoint for batch deployment. There you will see, okay, you need to make a post to this URL. And then we need to pass some credentials. That's actually a security to secure this endpoint, because otherwise everyone could just use your endpoint and deploy somewhere. We need to have this, and I will show you that right afterwards. We need to have it in the structure like this: basic, space, and then username, double point, password as base 64 string. I will show you how this works. But in the end, it looks like this. So the headers, so basic, and then that's the base 64 representation of this one. I will show you just afterwards. And then in the body, you describe, we call it a service. And each service here, each service ID is one deployment. So this is really for a batch deployment. You can have 1, 10, 20 services in here. And the service ID and the username, password, it all comes from a service we have to configure on the template, which I'm going to show you also afterwards. We need to tell where to deploy and then a couple of options down here. All right, but let's have a look at our scenario. That's, in here. So we call that URL, we say it's post, content type application JSON, and then the authorization is basic, and then by the long base64 representation of username and password. Where we get this from, I will show you. And then in here, that's the data that we are going to pass. I'm just using one service, this one, and the URL. It's again the site URL that we created just before. I have an email address that I can enter, which is used to send an email at the very end of the deployment. This person gets an email if someone is provided here that the deployment is finished, but it's just a simple email. And then here we can provide the status field, which should be updated during the provisioning. So the status field is on the same list, on this project list. So we can simply take the URL of the current site. It's the list of projects, and the field name is called provisioning status. It can be a text field or a choice field having the correct values. And the item is the project that is just added. So this is the configuration that will automatically update this item here, this field. So provisioning status, that's the field. Maybe I'm going to add one more to see that in action. AP webinar demo 3. So B. So first it will generate again the URL. Now it's here. And after a couple of seconds, we will see in progress here. Not yet. Now it's in progress. And now we're going back to the template, because that's where we have to get all this information, or the service and the password, username and password from. So it's not in that site, it's in the template here. And if we refresh, we see the new deployment was added here, because it's about this template here. This is deployed somewhere, and that's why we have to go into this template. So in this construction project template, where we have these lists and so on, the documents, different environments, sorry for that. We see the deployments. Here, deployments. It's still in progress. And like I said, this status will be reflected in the SharePoint list afterwards. So here we will see that it's being deployed. And this one here, that's the service. So the service is created, if we say publish, then there are the 3 options. So we can directly deploy to a site, we can use the manual installation, or we can use the skybow API. And we have the link to the documentation again here. Once I do that, I can give it a title, like here, construction project, or any title. Maybe you say construction project QA for the testing, and here I can choose which package. That should be the latest. Let's start with 1.000, and here you have to provide a login name and the password. And this can be anything. It can be theoretically, it can be test, but here I would use something more secure. But it's not an M365 user or any login. Don't use your credentials here, because it can be read afterwards in here. But this user has to be taken. By the way, in the meantime, I got the message again here. I was just informed. But this login name can be any username and password combination. And this has to be used in the call for the API. If you need to call the API, you need to, so here, this username and password, that's the one that you provide here. And that's more or less security for your service, for this template, that not just everyone, only people who know the service name and password can run that API provisioning. So like I said, don't use test, but for my scenario, I will use test. Then I hit next. We see a quick overview. And like I said, we will see that the password here again. And now I have another service registered. That's the first one. That's the one I'm using. And I created another one. And this service here in the upper right corner, you have this info icon where you can download the credentials again. So you would get a file. I think it's XML. Yeah, it's XML. And you can have a look at the password, username, password again here. And this here, this GUID that you see here is the service ID. So this not modify. So this 15E0, etc. If we look at ours, we have 18CC, blah, blah, blah. And that's the one from here, 18CC. So each one is a service, and that's the service ID you have to take. So it defines this service. So which ones should be taken for the deployment. And then, like I said, username, password. Here I was taking something more secure. You see provisioning API service user, and then just a more secure password. And then you have to go to base64 encode online. So any website where you can encode this. And the structure you need to provide is service login name, double point password. So in my scenario, it was this one, and then double point password. And then you encode it, and this is the part you have to pass here after the basic prompt. That's all described in the documentation. So if I would use test, then of course this is much test. It's much shorter, as you can see. So it's just an encrypted username password, which is a bit more secure than just plain text username password. And that's the thing you provide here to secure the API and your solution or your service. And yeah, service ID comes from the service registered on the solution you want to deploy. The URL was given, and yeah, that's it basically. Then it automatically starts. It all needs to be JSON stringified. And then once we have that solution deployed, now they are all on 1.1. And I could also go downwards, upwards. I just need to select the service itself, choose the version, which should be the latest or the one to install when you click update or when you call the provisioning again. I could even go one down. Yes. You see now the service is 1.1, and I could push it from here. So as soon as I start, it will automatically start this deployment, or I could call the URL again with the appropriate properties, and yeah, that's it. One last thing to know, to be able to run that and that it works, we have to install a so-called solutions foundation add-in. It's an app file you can download from that article, and you have to install it in the global app catalog, add it to any site, doesn't matter, even on the app catalog site itself, trust it once, and then you're good to go. But that's the most important, otherwise you get an error message. this one will trust our solution manager to be able to install anything on the site collections. So that's the important part if you use the batch deployment thing. Yes. I think that's it. The callback URL I was not using. We were previously using that, for example, to call another trigger like a POW automate or anything you can call with an URL. But now, since we have that status field update, yeah, we can use our own triggered actions to do something once finished, because both of them are. This one is called once the deployment is completed, and not if it failed. And this is constantly updating the status, and you can do then you can react there, like I showed before.
Now you should be able to save time and resources while delivering high-quality solutions using the skybow provisioning API.